I'm Libris, my pronouns are he, him, and this is Tin Tower Talks. This is a very occasional podcast. This is the first episode in about 2 years, where I have conversations with other people who are doing interesting things in the Pokemon community. If you watch my channel, you are probably familiar with today's topic. We're talking about the new 151. But just very briefly, in case someone listening isn't familiar with it, the new 151 was a project to redesign every single Kanto Pokémon. We started it in 2016 and finished it a year ago. So I wanted to commemorate its completion by talking about the project as a whole. My collaborators, Ness, aka Infinipede, and Julie, aka Banana Meteor, are here with me. And we also have a special guest. Ben of the YouTube channel Tam Valley Productions is here to interview us and serve as a guest host for this episode. So thank you all for joining me, and Ben, the reins are yours.
Well, thanks, Libris, for having me. I've been following this project for years now, and it's really cool to see it completed, and even cooler to get to pick all of your brains over this. So,
honestly, it's a relief to see it completed.
I'm sure, yeah. To get some background, I think I'm most curious to start off just by getting to know a little bit about all of your backgrounds to understand how the project came to be. So, you know, what are all of your backgrounds in content creation or maybe just art and the Pokemon franchise?
Well, I think the first thing that we should mention is that we've all known each other for over 15 years.
Oh my God, 15 years? Stop.
It's probably more like 18 years.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So when I was in, I think, beginning of high school, I started a Pokemon pixel art forum. If you're too young to remember forums, they were like message boards, but often they had like very specific topics. I'm sure there are some that are still running, but they're not. They used to be like the main social media, but they're not anymore. So I used to run one. It was called PMF, the Pokemon Mutation Factory, and Ness and Julie were both very active members there for a long time. We eventually met in person, and that was about 15 years ago.
Yeah. We should do that again sometime.
Yeah, we should. After, the forum went quiet, we still had a Facebook group of people that used to be on the forum. And so in 2016, I wanted to kind of commemorate the 20th anniversary of Pokemon, and I had this idea of redesigning every Pokemon. And I went on that group, and I asked if anyone else wanted to join me to participate as well. And at the time, Ness was the only one that was interested.
Yes. I didn't join the project until about halfway through. I should have joined it way earlier. I don't know what I was doing. Probably just asleep somewhere. But when I joined it, I realized how cool and fun and how ambitious of a project it was.
I think a little bit more ambitious than... It's certainly more than I anticipated.
Well, we did it.
Yeah. Ness, what made you want to join the project?
I don't know. It sounded cool. I wish I had a better answer for that, but I thought it was a cool idea. There was a lot of, in the Pokemon community at the time, this sort of Gen 1er, as we called it, ideology that, the first couple generations, or even just the first generation of Pokemon are the best ones. And I was very anti-Gen 1er, and I was like, yeah, we can improve on these.
Yeah, that is a very interesting question that I definitely had in mind when following this project. How about the other two of you? I mean, does this come from a place of love for Gen 1, or is it definitely more like, yeah, there needs to be serious improvement here?
I'm kind of under the mentality that Pokemon designs and just sort of the aesthetic have been more refined over the years. I sort of prefer the newer designs, but that's not to say that I dislike the old designs. More than anything, I think this was just a fun design project. it's fun to imagine all the Pokemon, reimagine them and figure out where they would be just as sort of an art prompt. And I think that's a lot of what appealed to Infinipede and Libris as well.
Yeah, I think for me, it came from a realization, like noticing, I guess, how the philosophy of Pokemon designs have evolved over the years. So this was 2016. It was the X and Y era. And I think like very clearly, if you put like an X and Y starter Pokemon even next to a Gen 1 starter Pokemon, you can tell that they are very different approaches to creature design. Like not so different that like, you know, Digimon is a very clearly different philosophy. So it's like it's the same philosophy, but the aesthetics of the creature design have evolved. It's not so much that I felt that the Gen 1 designs were bad. Certainly there are some that are, but I feel like every generation has some subpar designs. But it was more a desire to try to reimagine what those oldest Pokemon would look like in the newest generation. Now we can talk about whether that was successful or not, but that was the idea.
I see. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely curious because the three of you have been collaborating on this. Were all the redesigns kind of, you know, whether you like the Pokemon or not, did the decision behind the redesign come from your perspectives alone, or did you kind of crowdsource, you know, popular fan opinions? Like there's definitely Gen 1 Pokemon that there's consensus around after over now almost 30 years. People love or hate certain designs. Did you kind of factor those in?
I would say yes. If something was kind of the general opinion about a certain Pokemon, that probably did go into the design, sometimes consciously and probably more often subconsciously. The way that we organized the project was that, especially when it was just me and Ness, we would each kind of claim which Pokemon we wanted to work on. So like the person who was the lead creature designer for that Pokemon, we get to make the final decisions, but it was always a back and forth. So, you know, I would make a sketch, I would share with Ness, and they would tell me what they like, what they don't like, and we would go from there. At least the two of us were always going into every design. And then later on, when we started doing them on stream, which I think the first one was Grimer and Muck, then we had the input of the people who were watching the stream. You know, we didn't always like take that. Like if someone made a suggestion, we didn't always incorporate that. But there were a few times when someone made a suggestion that we were like, oh, actually, that's a great idea. Let's do that.
Or sometimes someone would overwhelmingly be like, hey, this looks wrong. And all of us would be like, hey, that does look wrong. Yeah. Let's fix that.
Interesting. Yeah. So walk me through the workflow of the project as a whole. I mean, it seems like the Tumblr site is presented in sequential Pokedex order, and the YouTube series on Libris's channel is roughly in that order, I think. So did you approach the redesigns, you know, going from Bulbasaur to Mew, or did you kind of jump around as you divided it up?
We went mostly in Pokedex order. On the day that we like launched the project, that we released, we made it public. We just put all of the starters up at the same time. And then from there, we just went in Pokedex order, except when there was some reason that we wanted to do things differently. Like where I wanted to tie in Kangaskhan with Cubone and Marowak. We didn't change any Pokedex numbers. We didn't change any like evolutionary lines. We didn't change any types or anything like that. The idea was always like, if that concept was done again today, what would be different? But for something like Cubone and Marowak, you know, over the years, it's become more obvious that their concepts were tied. And so we wanted to find a way to make them reflect each other, I guess. And so when we did those, it made sense to do them at the same time rather than doing Cubone and Marowak together doing a few other Pokemon and then going back to that concept to do Kangaskhan. But I think like other than those very few minor situations, it was all in Pokedex order.
I think we did do a couple other rearrangements just based on like Pinsir and Scyther were definitely posited as sort of quote unquote rival Pokemon in the original decks, though that's definitely changed as you have Pinsir with Heracross now and Scyther just kind of being Scyther. But because they were originally sort of these rival Pokemon presented as that in like anime, even in some of the games, we did them together. So, you've got number 123, number 127. Same thing with Mr. Mime and Jinx. We did those, I think, on the same day. So there were some like minor moving around for cases where Pokemon had connections, whether they were like aesthetic or lore based. And we also moved the legendaries all to the back end.
In part, it was to make the video presentation at the end. By the end of the project, that was something that we were thinking about. So it made sense to put all the legendaries in one video rather than doing them strictly in Pokedex order. But in general, it was pretty minor stuff.
I see. So what did this project kind of... What did it look like? Did all the art come first and then you jumped into finding a way to show it off through video format? Or was it always kind of a hand-in-hand thing where there was art and then video and switching off like that?
When I joined, we were pretty much always making the art on stream, but the lead designer of that specific Pokemon would show up with like concept art, essentially, I would say. And Libris would always handle the final art. But before that, I think it was, Infinipede and Libris will have to shed light on that, because I don't know what the process was like before.
We didn't really have video when we started. I don't think we did, at least.
No, because we started in 2016, and I only started my channel in 2018. I knew the Pokemon community on YouTube would be interested in the project, and so I decided to make those videos that share the designs, but also kind of critique them a little bit, because by that point they were already 2 years old, as a way to bring in bring the project to the YouTube audience. And also just because it was like the very beginning of my channel, it was a relatively easy kind of video to make. But afterwards, I would say once we started doing them on stream, the point of that was to help us stay regular, because throughout the project, like part of the reason it took us 6.5 years to complete is that there were times when we didn't do anything for several months at a time.
That's true.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons, like that's fine. But having them done on stream, that did change the dynamic of the workflow a little bit, because it became more like someone's going to bring the sketch. We might share the sketch ahead of time to just like get feedback on the ideas, just in our Facebook group. But then on stream is when we would take that sketch and transform that into the final art. And usually it would be the final art would be fairly faithful in terms of the design. Like I might change the pose or something like that, and obviously trying to keep the rendering consistent. But the design was usually fairly consistent from one to the other, except in cases where, an idea might come up during the stream.
Are there any specific instances that come to mind where maybe one of you had, a sketch that was one way and the final product was completely different?
I think the recent one is Aerodactyl. I'll pull it up here. You want to talk about it, Nis?
Sure. My original Aerodactyl had the body, with the exception of like the limbs, head, and tail, pretty much almost entirely encased in the amber. I thought that was cool. I liked the idea of it breaking out of the amber, because Aerodactyl doesn't have much to it as a original design. It's a pterodactyl. That's about all there is to it. we ended up drastically reducing the amount of amber on the design into a sort of like heart or arrowhead shaped thing on the chest. And I don't mind the finished design. I think it's probably better for it. It's just we got a lot of, there was a lot of feedback, mostly from Libris, actually. I don't know if it was so much from the audience as it was from you.
Yeah.
And when you did draw out your idea for the body, I was like, I'm fine with that. That's cool looking.
What I was going to say is that I think my designs ultimately changed very little from when I would show up with my sketch, because I would notably show up with like a crazy, like very detailed, colored, pre-rendered sketch, because I'm just very hands-on when it comes to being the lead for any project designs. So I wanted to make sure that I could relay my vision very carefully so that that you would know exactly what I wanted to do.
I was the opposite.
And both those are fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, both of those approaches are fine, but I think that when looking at your sketches, it also gave me less the impression of them being sketches, and so it felt like I had less freedom to make suggestions.
That's good. That's intentional.
I think my intention was the opposite. I was like, I've got an idea. This is go nuts.
Yeah, like there's merits to both approaches. Both of them can go well. And I think another kind of thing where some things didn't always quite click is that all three of us have very different approaches to creature design, ideas about what Pokemon designs should be like.
Absolutely.
Like when Ness shows me something that I think doesn't quite look like a Pokemon.
That's the classic.
Yeah, but because your sketches feel like sketches, I felt like I could tweak the design a little bit, like adjust the proportions a little bit here, simplify something in a way to make them to hopefully keep the idea, keep the concept the same, but make it visually look more like a Pokemon. Whereas with Julie's sketches, it was like the design was done.
You get what you get. Here it is, and you were like, "Great, I'll draw it."
Yeah. So with all of your various strengths and differences artistically, as I scroll through the final project, I'm really struck by how cohesive it looks. I mean, even when you look at like Bulbasaur and then Mew and Mewtwo, it's, it looks like they're all part of the same collection, which obviously they are. But for a project that, is comprised of 3 different artists and, 6.5 years, how did you kind of maintain that sense of cohesion with just the style and the philosophy?
To be honest, I'm not sure that we did.
Yeah. I think a lot of it was a case of just having one person draw the finished art.
Yeah, I think that helps. I think our process ultimately kind of mimics the way that Pokemon are designed. There's a group of designers, but at least there used to be one person that was doing all of the final art. Nowadays, I think there's multiple people, but they have a more established style, so it's easier for everyone to draw it in the same way. But back then, like in Gen 1, there were like 3 or 4 creature designers that would make up the Pokemon on pixel art. Obviously, I'm sure there were like rounds of adjusting the design, but ultimately it was Ken Sugimori making the final art, and that was the one that was like the established design and the ones that we generally the ones that we still have today. And so I think having that similar kind of process helped. I was able to draw all of the Pokemon in the same way, except for the first few, because those were done in watercolor. But once we transitioned to digital, I love working in watercolor, but like on paper in watercolor, I love it. But it just takes really long in terms of like setting up the colors and like mixing the inks to be the right shade and everything like that, and doing enough layers of ink to get the strength of the color that I wanted. It just always took really long compared to doing it digitally, where I can knock one out in a couple hours of like just doing the final work. Obviously, like the design process takes longer, but inking, coloring, like that is all super quick. And so that stage change notwithstanding, being able to do all of them in the same style and drawn by the same person, I think helps. But I mean, it's 6 years difference. I think I'm a much better artist now. And I also think I have a much better sense of Pokemon design, because like back then I did very little Fakemon design. When we were on PMF on the forum, we were mostly doing Pokemon fusions. So we were like working with existing pieces of Pokemon and putting them together in unique ways. And just occasionally we would do Fakemon. By the time we started the project, I hadn't done one in probably years. So I was very like out of practice. And so after 6 years of doing the project, plus doing Fakemon and Fusion like independently for my own reasons and for the channel and things like that, I think I am better at designing Pokemon. And so I think the Pokemon that are towards the end of the project look more like Pokemon.
See, that's interesting to me, because you've always struck me as a very unique Fakemon creator on YouTube, because I think you're on record in a video or two saying that you don't necessarily try to emulate especially the modern Pokemon art style, and that you kind of do your own while just following, the character design philosophies. Is that true for this project as well? Were you trying to kind of, do your own thing, or since you were redesigning pre-existing and some of the most iconic Pokemon, were you, kind of trying to follow more closely to, making it look like official Gen 1 art?
In general, I was trying to make it look more like Gen 1 art. Not so much the original watercolors. I did have a lot of experience doing watercolor on paper, but the kind of style that I was used to working with was not similar to to Sugimori's Gen 1, Gen 2 style. And so I think my original intention was to do those in the style that mimicked Sugimori, and I just didn't. Like my instinct of how to work with watercolors was just so different that I wasn't able to get that. But when I was doing them digitally, then I was like intentionally trying to make them look like Gen 1 art style. I think maybe they would have been more convincing as modern Pokemon if we'd done the modern Pokemon art style, but it was a little bit of just like, this is the kind of the style that the original designs were presented in. So let's try to present it in that same style of rendering and just update the designs themselves.
I will go on record as saying I'm also very anti every Fakemon should be done in Sugimori style. So I was very against the modern Sugimori being used, as I feel like it would make the project look very generic.
But you're okay with like the more classical Sugimori, like the watercolor?
Yeah, because most people don't do it. It's just I feel like our project would stand out less if we were using modern Sugi.
Yeah, I agree.
And we did do a poll on our Tumblr at the time. This was for Pikachu. I did Pikachu in watercolor, like in the same style of the previous ones. But I also did Pikachu in the modern Sugimori style and in a digital take on the classic. I don't remember. I could look up like what the poll results were, or like how many votes there were. So I don't remember how many people were participated in the poll or had strong opinions or anything like that. But ultimately, it was the classic style that won out. Or maybe it was a tie, and it was Ness's very strong feelings that broke the tie. But but we did do a poll, and the audience was okay with the style change.
Right. Yeah. So I would definitely love to get into some of the more specifics now. To start with the positives, I remember you pointed out Growlithe and Butterfree were two of the kind of general ones that you saw as improvements.
I'll start with Butterfree because that was a very early design. But you can see here, 790 notes. It's the most popular design on Tumblr. The second closest one is like 500 and something. So it's by a very significant margin that it's the most popular. And like honestly, I'm not sure why that is. Like why Butterfree specifically got so much attention. Part of what I wanted to accomplish with Butterfree was addressing the theory that I think is very well founded, that at some point Butterfree and Venomoth were switched because there are a lot of design elements from Venonat that you can see in Butterfree, and a lot of design elements from, well, less so, but some design elements from Caterpie and Metapod that you can see in Venomoth. So I still wanted it to look like Butterfree and not like Venomoth. Like, it's not a redesign of Venomoth, it's a redesign of Butterfree. But I wanted to make sure that all of the design elements that specifically seemed to reference Venonat were replaced by design elements that specifically referenced Caterpie and Metapod. And so maybe because it's such a drastic change, it's the one that's the most popular. Maybe because I, addressed those those issues, it's the most popular. But like beyond that, I don't think it's that successful. It's just it's an okay Pokemon design, but.
And how about Growlithe? I know that was another one that you mentioned to me.
Yeah, so Growlithe, it's not even that I think it's especially good or anything. Like I think it's good, but it's the what's interesting about it is that it's basically the exact same direction that Hisuian Growlithe went in ultimately. I think this one was your design, Ness?
Growlithe? No, it was your design, but I gave you one of the larger ideas from it, which was the adding the smoke main.
Okay. Yeah, so this was more of a 50-50, I guess. But yeah, like with the kind of curly mane that looks like smoke is like exactly the same thing that Hisuian Growlithe did. So obviously the design ultimately is very different. And same for Arcanine. Like the designs themselves are very different, but it's the same direction. And so I feel like this is an especially successful design or an especially successful update of the original design, because the way that we found to update the design was the same one that the actual official Pokemon designers chose to go with.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing that I mean, yeah, clearly the project was, successful on some level then, because you objectively tapped into kind of what the designers were doing and unlocked, maybe the hidden inspirations before, in ways that the Gen 1 designs didn't really do in a lot of ways. And there were, a lot of them were very plain.
Yeah. So this was, we published it on May 4th, 2018. So what, about 4 years before Hisuian Growlithe was a thing?
It's pretty amazing.
So shall we move on to the ones that we are actually our favorites?
Definitely, yeah. Let's start with you, Libris. I know you had, I think Gengar would be first in the dex order.
Honestly, there's a lot of designs throughout the entire dex that I think are very successful. But there are some, I think the ones towards the end, the ones that hit right for me are extremely successful. This one is honestly a little bit less so, because I love the concept. I don't know if I necessarily see Pokemon going for something like this, maybe, but I think it looks awesome, and I can imagine it looking really, really fantastic in 3D. The rendering of it doesn't work. Because the idea was that the skin would be kind of like a Vantablack or Black 2.0, kind of situation where it is just black. But to me, when I was rendering it, it wouldn't make sense for me to render the Pokemon in completely flat black. I just didn't think that would look good. And it also didn't make sense for me to not give it white highlights, because that's such a like key component of the Sugimori Gen 1 style. And I just don't think that it looks right. Like those white highlights don't belong there on the black parts of the design. But the designs themselves, I really love. The concept kind of behind it was to kind of bring a Cheshire Cat kind of element to it. The origin of the idea came from a fan theory that the Ghastly family is like coming through from one dimension to another. So like at first you only see the head, then you see the head and the hands, and then you see the whole body. And in both Mega Gengar and Gigantamax Gengar, it kind of goes back a little bit, right? It's right on that line. And so I like that idea of it like slowly revealing itself. But then I also combined that with a Cheshire Cat idea. So that's why it's supposed to be such a dark skin, because then you would only see the glowing face. And it also gave a little bit more shape to the smoke on Ghastly to kind of imply a cat shape there.
I kind of wish that you had leaned more into the Vanta Black vision, but other than that, it's really cool. I really like the way it came out, and I like Gengar being a little kitty, which is just a bonus.
Yeah. I feel like this is a design that will or would look better in 3D.
Yes, I agree. I would love to like see this rendered in 3D in like the style of Scarlet and Violet, for example. I think the kind of texturing that you can get in modern games would work really well for this design.
Yeah, I'm glad we started with this pick, because I from my perspective, this is a very good example of, from a viewer's perspective, why this project, the real intent of it, which is, really modernizing these Pokemon concepts. And you see that with this, it's like you're doing a ghost, but it's also a Cheshire Cat. So you're kind of hybridizing multiple elements, which is more common for modern Pokemon, whereas OG Gengar, while it is a very iconic design, it's really just like, it's just a ghost. And that doesn't really fly with modern Pokemon.
He's big, and he's fat, and he's purple, and that's it.
Yeah.
And back then, that was all you needed. and honestly, I think the most modern Pokemon designs kind of go back to that a little bit. Like the concepts tend to be a little bit more complex, I think, but the designs, some of them aren't. Like I feel like Flamigo could easily be a Gen 1 Pokemon. Yeah.
It was so funny that you bring up Flamigo, because that's one that people really harped on when it released, because people were like, oh, it's just a flamingo. And it's, it's so different from the Gen 1er mentality, where people really wanted Pokemon to return to that simplicity, and then they're given that simplicity, and they're like, no, not like that.
Yeah. I will say I don't personally like Flamigo all that much, but it's fine.
It needs a little something.
It does need a little... I don't know... If it was just a flying type, I wouldn't care. The fact that it's like a fighting type is like, what are you?
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, the other one that I wanted to highlight, I assume that's where we were going?
Yeah, to Eevee, I believe.
Yeah. I'm just really happy with how these turned out. Eevee itself, especially, I think, is just spot on for how an Eevee-like creature would be made into a Pokemon today. The kind of more exaggerated proportions, the simpler body, but still with a lot of personality. And I like Eevee, the original Eevee and the original 4 evolutions. I like them, but they're not that special. I like the evolutions that I like the most are Umbreon, obviously, and then Espeon and Sylveon. And Glaceon. Later evolutions, I think, do a much better job at being evolutions. Even then, I think the problem is that evolutions in general, they're very similar in terms of their anatomy. And it just seems a little bit strange because it's a Pokemon that is supposed to be super adaptive. Like, aside from Vaporeon obviously having very significant changes to the anatomy, they're all really similar. And I wanted to bring a little bit more variety to it and still keep enough elements that are consistent to make it obvious that these Pokemon are related to each other, but show more of like how it could adapt into different roles. I mean, I think these are great Pokemon designs. I think that what I came up with is great, but I think what I like the most about these is that I was able to get, like, on paper, figuratively on paper, exactly what I had in my head. The ideas that I had for how to design or how to redesign these Pokemon actually worked exactly the way that I imagined, the way that I intended, and that doesn't always happen. I think the two of you are a little bit more ambivalent, I guess, about these designs.
I think they're good. I just don't really care for evolutions too much in the first place. I like that you changed the body shape and all that. I know that's one of my biggest gripes as well, with the originals.
I think that was originally actually your idea. I think you were the one who mentioned it, and I was like, absolutely. I had not really thought about that. I had not considered that option, but, like, yes.
Eevee is definitely my favorite here, and I really like how you used little bits of other color elements in the evolutions. I think Jolteon really benefits from that. Just a little bit of added blue really makes it pop. I do wish that Vaporeon's bubble mane looked a little more bubbly. It looks a little cottony to me, but, like, ultimately, that's not an issue with the concept itself, and I think the concepts itself are really strong.
I guess I didn't mention that one thing that I wanted to keep consistent across all of these is that the elemental parts of the design needed to be natural. Like, for example, like, Flareon is not a Pokemon that has actual fire on it, right? It is a Pokemon whose fur looks like fire. And so I wanted to make sure that I accomplished that as well. This is fur, it just happens to be flame shaped. And so it's the same thing.
Right.
And so it's the same thing with Vaporeon, in that the idea is not that it is actual bubbles. It's that it's like a really fluffy, curly fur that looks like bubbles. So maybe it looking like cotton is a good thing, because super curly fur that looks like bubbles would probably look more like cotton than actual bubbles.
Right. I feel that.
Awesome. Yeah. So should we move on then? I think the next one up was the Hypno family.
Sure.
I'm so glad you picked this one to talk about, Ness, because if you didn't, I would want to.
So, I guess all of my designs, I kind of came at them from the concept of, I actually think Tam put it was either Tam or Julie who put it as, like, drawing out the inspiration in all of my later concepts, at least. Drawing out the inspiration in the design. That was originally, like, in the Pokemon. And I feel like Hypno was, it's obviously it's a Baku. It's like the Japanese dream-eating yokai. Kind of like a weird little chimera based on a tapir. But it didn't feel very much like one, and with Hypno, I really wanted to make that inspiration more obvious. We really didn't change much from Drowsy initially. With Hypno, though, there were a couple changes based on what people in the chat were saying, and I think they ended up turning out pretty good. I originally had him still holding the pendulum, but there were a lot of suggestions in the chat, like, what if his tail was the pendulum? And I'm not always like into that idea of Pokemon body part is tool. Like, I think Pokemon should be allowed to have tools. But I think it works here. I think the shape of the tail and the pose that he's in just makes it work fine, which I like a lot. And the tusks as the evil mustache weren't my initial intention either, but people said, "Oh, it looks like an evil mustache," and I'm like, I'll take it. That's fine. I think they came out looking really good, and they're some of my favorite designs from the project.
Yeah, I think like this is one of, if not the most successful, I think, redesign of the whole project, because not only does it very clearly maintain the same inspiration and still has the same vibe of Hypno, like looking like a creepy person, it makes the design so much more interesting. And I think it looks like, put this in Gen 9 and it fits in perfectly. I'd probably be using this on my team if it was in Gen 9.
That is high praise. I'll take that.
Look, I like Farigiraf just fine, but it ain't got nothing on this Hypno. And Farigiraf was on my team, so, I can retire Farigiraf.
Yeah, this is definitely a very strong design. From my viewer perspective, I really like it. This is giving me what I think a lot of people would want from this project, which is kind of modernizing these designs, infusing a lot of more appealing elements to more plain designs, especially ones that people might find kind of unsettling or, just, I don't know. I don't think a lot of people liked Hypno for just the reason that it looked kind of creepy. Like, it's not something that you'd want to like befriend. And I think, a lot of Pokemon design philosophy is about balance. And this design, it has those kind of unsettling elements. It's true to Hypno, but as a viewer, I read this as like, oh, this is more intelligent. It's more regal. It inspires more respect, and for me to want to like befriend it rather than be afraid of it.
Yeah, the original Hypno is creepy, but not in a good way.
Yeah,
because I think like Gengar is creepy, but it works. Like, it's in a good way, and Hypno is not.
See, I like the original Hypno for that reason. I like that it is just like, oh, it's like a creepy weirdo. I like when Pokemon is willing to make something that isn't necessarily so appealing to people. But that's just me.
That's fair.
And that's why I took on Hypno as a redesign. It's like, I like the original a lot, and I wanted to, make it something that maybe was more generally appealing while still keeping him creepy.
That's cool. Yeah, that's a lofty task. I don't think I'd be able to successfully redesign something that I enjoyed so much. So kudos to that. That's cool. I think the next positive one, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that next was Dratini and Chansey.
That's fine. I'll say good things about Dratini. Dratini was one of the last designs I did for the project, and I always kind of got the designs, since I just came late to the table, I sort of just got the designs that Ness and Libris didn't pick, which is totally fine. But
the ones we didn't have strong feelings about.
Yeah, you were like, you can have this one. And I was like, great, I will take the crumbs. But I really wanted to add some cohesiveness to this design, because I quite like all the Pokemon in this line, but I think that me, as well as a lot of other fans, have a strong issue with how little Dragonair and Dragonite tied together specifically. I like both of them separately, but they just don't seem like they're the same Pokemon. So I thought it was really fun to sort of put these elements in them that still kept their unique personality, but did make the line feel more like a line and less like two separate Pokemon. And weirdly, I think adding legs to the under-evolved forms kind of worked out. And since there's still a snake in Gen 1, like, you don't lose out on too much diversity there. So, yeah.
It was a brave choice.
Yes.
To put legs on them.
I mean, there was another design where I removed the legs, and then I felt like I should bring them back on another one. So I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing.
I mean, removing the legs on Dragonite seems to be the more popular choice when people redesign it. I like that you took the road less traveled here. I think it works.
Thank you.
I think Dragonair is probably the most popular member of this family in the original designs. And so I think it makes sense that people would choose to do Dragonite in a way that is more Dragonair rather than like try to bring elements of Dragonite into the rest of the family. But given that was your choice, I think it works quite well. I think there are some issues in terms of like the aesthetics. I think I don't know exactly what it is, but I feel like they end up looking, and I don't think you're going to take this as a bad thing necessarily, but they feel more like fitting in with Neopets.
I feel like it's the fluffy mane that does that for you, but I'm not upset at that at all.
Yeah, and I'm not even like I didn't really grow up with Neopets. It's just a matter of like the aesthetics, and so there's something about it that when I look at these, I don't necessarily see Pokemon, and it could just be a combination of like the rendering and just like being more used to the original designs, things like that. But I think like the designs themselves, I do think they're successful. I actually really like Dragonair. This new version of Dragonair, I think, works really well. It's my favorite one of this line. I think I could still see them in a Pokemon game. Like replace the Dragonites that are flying around Paldea with this one. I think it would fit in just fine.
Cool.
All right. Well, on that note, why don't we jump to the negatives? I think the first step in the dex order would be Clefairy and Clefable.
Okay. We were coming at both Pikachu and Clefairy with the idea that Clefairy was originally maybe intended to be a mascot and Pikachu wasn't. And I feel like maybe I leaned too heavily into the Pikachu Raichu sort of body shape archetype for these guys, when maybe I should have taken that and, still had the obvious Pikachu-inspired elements, maybe even the proportions of Raichu, but brought in more of the sort of the Moon Fairy aspect of it, because I feel like there's not, like, Clefairy's fine in my opinion. I feel like with Clefable, there's just not a lot that makes it more unique or more interesting than the original. It's just Clefable with a new body type and markings. The tail looks fine, I guess. I kind of like it, but I think really it just should have been... I needed to change the original design up more and not just lean in to the mascotization of it, I suppose.
Yeah, I can see that. I think Clefairy is very good. My one maybe critique of it is just that it still feels very Gen 1.
Yeah, exactly. That's part of my problem with it.
Yeah, I off the top of my head now, I don't know how I would fix it. Like maybe it's a matter of like colors or something like that. Having more detailed patterns or something. But it's I think Clefairy works really well. I like the difference in the tail. But I can see what you're saying about Clefable, that it's just skinny Clefable.
I definitely would have come at it from sort of a, either coming at it from like the fairy angle or the sort of like alien almost angle. Not making it look like a traditional gray alien or anything, nothing like that. But like this came from the moon, maybe have some more lunar inspired aspects to it.
And looking at this rendering now, I can't remember what your original idea was for the moon phases on the chest, but I must have used like the circle tool to make sure I could get like good circles, and it just looks very artificial.
Yeah, I will say that. I think it's probably a combination of my design maybe not combining them in a way that doesn't look so artificial, and your rendering of it that just makes it not look great. Like, at this point in time, I would still love to have that moon phase marking on the chest, but I think what I might do is maybe make it like combined the three phases together into like a single marking almost.
Yeah.
I think it's really just the line weight that would tie it together. Just every other line on it is a lot thicker. So I don't really have a problem with the angle itself, just the execution there.
I think it also doesn't help that both the marking and the chest are very light colored, and so because of the rendering style, that there's like barely any differentiation between the color of the marking and the color of the chest. So
that's true. Yeah,
it's just a combination of factors, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to do like really subtle color differences in this style where everything goes to white.
Yeah, that's true.
This also, not necessarily a negative at all. I'm just curious, why is this one of the only designs that has some kind of gender dimorphism that you included with the tails? Because I find that very interesting that you chose to add that.
I liked the idea of the crescent moon shaped tail for Clefairy, either way. And I realized that, Pikachu has, in my opinion, one of the most iconic gender dimorphisms with the heart-shaped tail. I think it's cute. So I thought, what if we brought that from, because Pikachu's the mascot now, what if we took that from Pikachu as the mascot of Pokemon and gave Clefairy something similar that, we could be carried along generations without being, left aside like a lot of the other gender dimorphisms were.
Yeah, we didn't do any other gender differences, did we?
Mr. Mime.
Oh, yes, you're correct. I was thinking about Mr. Mime earlier. I didn't even consider it.
That's okay. It was a pretty subtle one.
Yeah. I liked it, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we probably didn't bother doing a lot of differences in the beginning because Gen 1 didn't have any. Right? Like even Pikachu that was added in Gen 4.
Yeah.
And all of actually a lot of differences were added in Gen 4 across all Pokemon, but Pikachu is the one that like remains significant.
Exactly. And to me, that's why I thought it would make sense giving Clefable something similar, because that gender difference in Pikachu is very recognizable now, whereas a lot of the gender differences added in Gen 4 haven't carried over into the 3D.
Right. So should we move on then to, I think the next one was Nidoqueens specifically, if you guys want to talk about that.
I wanted to talk about the Nidoran line in general. I think the two Nidorans, I think both of them work well enough for what they are, and just none of the others do. And it's just it's a combination of factors. I think the main thing is that I didn't find like a new idea, a new concept to layer onto the original. But I did have one. My original concept for Nidoqueen, just because I was designing that one first. Well, I guess my concept in general for the line was to intentionally reverse the roles. So like where Nidoqueen is the more defensive one, that is like the one that protects the burrow, protects the young and things like that. And Nidoking is the more aggressive one that goes, I don't remember now if Nidoking in lore like goes hunting, but it's the one that goes out of the burrow to, goes seeking fights and things like that. So I wanted to intentionally switch those two roles. And so my original concept for Nidoqueen was thinner, taller, still armored and still, with big horns and everything. But it stood up straight. It was more, it had the body shape of things like Lopunny, Lopunny is the only one that's coming to mind right now, but it's like, it's still animalistic, but it stands up straight and it has, I guess, a bit of a figure. That idea was basically rejected. So at the time, we had another collaborator whose name now escapes me. What was their name, Ness?
Their name is Sterling.
Sterling, right. Yes, that's right. So Sterling had joined us around the time that we were designing Pikachu, and it was Pikachu was their design. And I think when I rendered the final Pikachu, it didn't there were no really significant changes for Pikachu. But their design for Raichu, when I did when I sketched out my take on it, there were some differences, and as far as I remember, I tried to justify those differences. But because they were new to the project, I think they just kind of accepted differences and didn't. We
fought about it. It was very divisive.
Was it at the time?
Yeah, with Raichu, yeah, we were. It took weeks to figure the issues with Raichu out.
Yeah, I remember there being some back and forth. I thought for some reason that the bigger tensions about it came later. But in any case, so there was already some tension there. So when I presented my idea for Nidoqueen, I felt that the idea, or I felt that the design was rejected before I even had a chance to defend what the concept was. Sterling, gave some critiques that I took as more like destructive criticism than constructive criticism, and so I was very frustrated by that, and I could tell that it wasn't going to be productive to try to keep pushing that way. So I accepted that concept was not going to work. And because I had to throw out the idea that I had, I was never able to find another idea that I thought worked. Ultimately, I think Nidoqueen looks okay. Nidorino looks okay, but Nidoking, I think, looks awkward. It probably could have, if I was more skilled or just more experienced at drawing this kind of thing at the time, maybe I could have drawn it in a way that worked better. Nidorina, I think, looks super awkward as well. But the part that bothers me the most is that there's nothing special about any of them. There's not really anything that I added to them. I just kind of redrew them a little bit differently.
I feel I don't think your original concept for Nidoqueen was bad. I feel like it was the fact that it was like a sexy bunny. I think that was the issue. Was, it's the lady one has to be has to have a figure. It's a little. I get why you did it. I feel like maybe without Sterling there, Sterling's a very strong personality. I feel like maybe without Sterling there, we could have made something that worked. But I also feel like it was a little, I get why they had a problem with it.
Yeah, and I don't think I gave Nidoqueen a figure on purpose. I think it was more a matter of I made it stand up straight so it had a more humanoid shape in general. And I replaced the bra, basically, that the original Nidoqueen, I had replaced that with a more solid, kind of a breastplate kind of type armor. Yeah. And I think just by the nature of that it ended up having more of a figure. But I was very I liked that idea a lot, and my what I had in mind, I hadn't gotten to the point of sketching it, but what I had in mind for Nidoking was to make it more defensive looking as well, and probably less aggressive, to make it more the caring one that stays with the offspring. And so I think if the critique had been done differently, I think we could have found a way to do the Nidoqueen that I wanted without it having as much of a figure. If that was the main issue, I think we could have done it. But that aside, I just don't think there's anything in these new designs that works. I don't think that they are good redesigns of the original. I don't think they look more like modern Pokemon. Nothing like that. So even if that original idea, had been rejected, or like was rejected, I probably could have found something else, and I just didn't.
My biggest gripe with these has always been the noses on the non-Nidoran ones. They just look kind of awkward.
Yeah, they don't really fit in with the rest of the aesthetic. I think because there's no solid black anywhere else on the design. But that's okay. We don't need to dig into them worse. I think you know.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the noses because that was, to me, like, they look okay. Like if you cover the nose up.
Yeah, I find this whole story very interesting because it seems like you struggled the most with what I believe is one of the most to-date abstract Pokemon of all time. So I don't think anyone would blame you too hard for struggling with these redesigns, because with pretty much any other Pokemon, you have something to go off of. But the Nido family, they're such an amalgamation of other creatures that they're just kind of like generic kaijus.
Yeah.
And like the one kind of real life creature inspiration that I see in them is rabbits. So like that probably played into it looking like consciously or subconsciously more sexualized because of it ending up looking like a bunny girl.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, I definitely think that the Pokemon with with more ambiguous inspirations were some of the harder ones.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think Spearow and Fearow came out fine, but I had to reach to get anything to base them on.
Yes, you probably did because they're just birds, but I think they came out better than fine. I think Fearow in particular is great.
They are just birds, and you had with Pidgeot and Pidgeotto, you took like the whole like Horus pose thing and being like, okay, this is an Egyptian god now, like, which makes sense because if you take that out, they're just pigeons, they're just birds. It was a lot of the early Pokemon were very hard to figure out any kind of angle for.
So yeah, second to last negative one was Golem.
The problem with Golem is that I think I nailed Geodude. Like, at least I nailed Geodude as far as like what my idea was. The Geodude looks exactly like what I wanted it to look like. Graveler is more of a transitional thing, and I think it's fine. It's nothing special, but it's fine. The thing is that Golem is so different from the rest of the family that it made it so difficult to come up with something that was fitting with my idea of Geodude that still looked like Golem, and I failed. Like, it looks like Golem, and it has the features of the Geodude that I wanted. Like, those two things are there. It doesn't look good, and I don't think it looks like a Pokemon either. It looks super awkward. So I think Golem is one of those Pokemon that I should have taken like the Butterfree route and just redesigned from scratch. Like, designed a new evolution for Graveler, but that's not what I did, and it just doesn't work.
That's what I was going to say, actually, is, you could have tried the Butterfree angle, but
I think it's because I didn't have a better idea. Like, I didn't come up with what would Geodude evolve into if not Golem. Yeah,
this one is also super tough. Okay, random question. Was this made before Colossal?
Before Colossal, yes.
Okay.
It was made after Alolan Geodude. I think you can see the Alolan Geodude influences pretty clearly in the style of Geodude. But yeah, Colossal did not exist at the time. This was, let me double check. December 2018. So it's about a year before Gen 8 was released.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I was just asking because the gems on the back and also the kind of colorful in-mouth colors. It reminds me a lot of Colossal's general aesthetic.
So you had something right there.
Oh, I'm not taking that as a compliment. I don't like Colossal.
Oh, me neither. I'm just saying, you hit something on the head with the whole Pokemon thing.
I guess so.
I don't like it either.
All right. And the last one that you all identified as needed improvement was Chansey. So I'm very curious about that.
Chansey. This one was one that I headed, and my big direction was I kind of wanted to take away the elements of Chansey that felt more fairy type, because fairy type is kind of associated with these pastel pinks these days and these very non-threatening, largely I would say, aesthetic. And it wasn't a problem when Chansey was revealed, of course, because they didn't have fairy type, but then they sort of took these Pokemon that feel analogous to Chansey, like Clefairy and Jigglypuff, and those became fairy type, but Chansey did not. So it's always felt a little incongruent to me since the addition of that. So in addition to that, I think the color scheme was a good choice, but then I sort of started to add these kangaroo elements leaning into the pouch. I do not think that was a good choice, because to me, kangaroos are kind of more of this aggressive and powerful creature, and that just doesn't mesh with sort of the caring and helpful healer that Chansey is, I would say. And like that's the main element of its design, not the pouch thing. So I should have kept with that. And if I had leaned into the kangaroo thing, I think I should have made the appendages and things that I amplified, like the tail and the ears, a lot cartoonier and big and floppy in a way that kept Chansey feeling very approachable. And if I could redo it, I certainly would.
You know, I don't think original Chansey is a particularly interesting Pokemon design in general. So and again, it's one of those very kind of abstract ones. So you don't have a lot to work with. But looking at your design, the only thing that I think I would do differently is the arms. I think I would give it back the stubby, like, arms that don't bend.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's my gripe is really just the arms and the pose.
Yeah, I think if it had its arms, like, up, and so it would look like it's jumping with its arms up, I think that would look endearing, and it might be enough.
Yeah, I think the floppy ears are a good idea. I think that'd be kind of cute.
Yeah, bigger ears. They don't seem to command any presence in the design right now. They kind of feel more tacked on than anything, than part of the elements as a whole. So I would probably either play those up or change those in a different way.
Yeah, I think the arms are the only thing that, like, doesn't work for me. There's obviously, like, little things that could be improved, like the ears, and I think the face could probably be a little bit more unique in some way. I don't have an idea off the top of my head, but it is just a face.
Yeah. Okay, I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
One interesting consideration here too is that this is one of the only, if not the only, Pokemon in this project that is bookended by evolutions on both ends from other generations.
That is true.
With Happiny and Blissey. So, I mean, how much did that come into play with considering them, or were you just tackling Chansey in isolation?
Almost none, I would say it came into play. One of the things that Libris and Ness sort of recommended to me early on in the project was consider Pokemon with evolutions. Like, don't think about that, because those are not really present in this project. We should sort of be focusing on what we have and making that good without worrying about things that are not a design project that we're tackling. So if you ask me what I would do with Happiny and Blissey in this line, I don't know.
So the idea was definitely to, like, these Pokemon, or the Chansey was introduced as a single stage Pokemon. Our redesign of Chansey should be a single stage Pokemon. But throughout the project, we did look at the other stages for inspirations, because, like, creating an evolution or a pre-evolution for a Pokemon is in a way a redesign, right? It is reimagining what that concept could look like. And so, for example, Electabuzz, I redesigned it as Electabuzz. I did not redesign it like trying to imagine how it's going to evolve from Elekid or evolve into Electivire. but I really like the big forearms from Elekid and Electivire. So I felt I'm going to give big forearms to Electabuzz. Same with Seadra, that ended up looking more like Kingdra because I like Kingdra better than Seadra, and like I think Seadra is an unnecessary step in that evolutionary family, and so I ended up turning Seadra into something more like Kingdra. And in that particular case, I don't think that it necessarily works as well, but like we did look at other stages for inspiration of what might be different. And so I think if you had looked at Happiny and Blissey for like what kinds of changes they made on top of Chansey, I don't know, there might have been an idea there.
Maybe.
I don't know, because they're very similar. At least Blissey is.
It's so tough because Blissey is so deeply leans into this frilly pink aesthetic, which I so strongly associate with fairies now. Yeah, Blissey's ears could have definitely maybe worked on this, but there's still a sort of like curled femininity to them where
you could uncurl them.
Yeah. But no, it's hard for me to imagine what Blissey's ears would look like uncurled. I'm trying to imagine that right now in life.
Well, you know what I mean, like the big ears.
It's tough. And it's not that I dislike the femininity at all, of course. That's fine. There's plenty of Pokemon that are feminine and great. It's just like, how is this a normal type, you know?
I think just in general, the most successful designs are the ones that actually do look more like Pokemon, and the least successful ones are the ones that don't quite look like Pokemon. But I think we had honestly an additional challenge there, that because it took 6.5 years, it started in Generation 6, right? We released the starters on Pokemon Day 2016. I believe that was the same day that Sun and Moon were revealed. Throughout the project, we went through Sun and Moon, Sword and Shield, and the beginnings of Scarlet and Violet Pokemon being released. And so I feel like the Gen 6 aesthetic, that was the one that was like the most prevalent at the time that we started. Obviously, it's very different from Gen 1, but I think it's also quite different from Gen 9. And so what it means to look like a Pokemon has also drifted as we were working on the project. And I think that added a level of challenge. Some Pokemon look more complex these days. Some Pokemon look more cartoony these days. Pokemon isn't what it used to be.
Right. Well, I think that is pretty much all the individual designs that you all wanted to highlight. So I have like one or two more closing questions. So I think to wrap things up, I mean, firstly, we kind of did a very deep dive just now into all the unsuccessful or successful designs. But if you all had to pick maybe one on each end, like perhaps the best example to exemplify the success of the project, and perhaps one that you really, if you were to redo this, would change first, what would those be?
I feel like, though, I can say, to exemplify the success of the project, I don't know. I feel like people really like the new Tangela, and I also really like the new Tangela. And this is as someone who really likes the original Tangela. I just think it works. It does what it set out to do, and it's cute.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, on the positive end, I think there are a lot of really good examples. Tangela is definitely one of them. Dugtrio, I'm really happy with it. And even like there's smaller ones like Meowth is a fairly simple redesign, but I think it's effective.
Oh, I love the Meowth.
It's the same with Psyduck.
I really liked your Alakazam and Abra, the whole Abra family.
Yeah, I love those too. But I think that if I was to pick just one, it would be Hypno.
Wow, I'm flattered.
If I was to pick one of my own, like I think maybe Eevee, because I can't imagine Eevee, a creature that is Eevee, being introduced in like Gen 9. I can't imagine it looking any different.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Like the one that I would absolutely want to change, that's a harder question because I feel like some of them, or I would say the majority of them, is just like, I like the concept, but the execution is not all there, including I think the Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee, the springy limbs. I like the idea. I don't think it quite works visually, so I would try to find a different solution for that idea. The ones that I would like absolutely want to change are the ones where I don't think the concept is there. And so I think probably the Nidoran family is definitely the one that sticks out to me. There's just nothing to them. Certainly of my own, I think that would be it. And there's a couple others that, like, I think Chansey is probably one that I would want to redo as well. But like in that case, there is the question of like, is it just that it's not the kind of Pokemon that I like?
Right. Yeah, now that I'm looking at that Tangela, I definitely see why you like that one so much.
Yeah, it is very cute.
Yeah.
And it has the color to it. Like I think the blue and green and the extra red accents, I think like all of that together just elevates Tangela quite a bit.
Yeah, and we were kind of torn on whether or not to use the whole gradient, but it worked out.
Yeah, it's interesting that with the exception of really just kind of the Nidoqueen that you showed off earlier, a lot of the general proportions and just, body types and details of the Pokemon remain intact. You're really just kind of redesigning patterns and colors in a lot of instances. And it's really astounding how much that adds, just kind of being a bit bolder with a wider color palette that isn't limited by Game Boy graphics or what have you. So that's really cool.
I think some of the biggest like differences between Gen 1 Pokemon and modern Pokemon Gen 9 in particular is like, one is use of color. A lot of Gen 1 Pokemons are just like shades of one color, and that's boring. And the other one is that even though obviously the pixel art back then was really simple, a lot of the final art was actually kind of complex. So like Tangela, for example, it's just a mess of vines, right? It has a lot of vines, and it's like they are relatively thin vines. So I think making them chunkier vines that still cover pretty much the entire body, but there's like less going on visually, I think that helps.
We also talked a little about, when we talked about Porygon on the retrospective, about how movement they've started to use movement more in the designs.
Yeah, which is hard to communicate when we're doing the static art, but it's something that can go into the concept. And even though you can't quite see how that would look in the art that we did, the possibilities of how it moves exist.
Yeah, so I think one of my closing questions here is, it's been 6 years now, and as we've dug in so specifically to many of these designs, you've exercised a lot of character design philosophy, and I'm sure you've all learned a lot along the way, perhaps about the Pokemon franchise or about your own capabilities or interests as artists. So, now that the project is complete, what are some of just your personal takeaways?
Let's do it again. Let's do Gen 2.
I'd be down for it, honestly.
I don't know. Not because I wouldn't be interested in redesigning Gen 2 Pokemon, but it's a lot of work.
It is.
It's a lot of work, and like trying to keep it regular and not just doing it, when we feel like it.
It's tough.
Yeah, it's tough. And like just on a practical side, these days I have a lot of other things. Like when we started this project, I didn't have any other like content creation or like anything else going on. I was just it was like I get home from work and do I work on some Pokemon redesigns or do I play video games? It could go either way, but like there's not a lot of competition for my time. Now not only am I making videos, like I have other like personal projects that I'm working on in the background as well. And so I've been, reducing how many videos I make because of that to try to make time for other things. And so I don't know if adding another project is the right call, but maybe we'll get there one day.
No, it's okay. Mostly I said it as a meme, but
we did Gen 1 to commemorate 20 years. Maybe we do Gen 2 to commemorate 30 years.
Hey, why not?
I think my big takeaway is I had a lot of fun. I love just doing a little project and being a part of something bigger than just myself. And even though it took a while and I only joined in the later half of things, like I'd love to do it again. It doesn't even have to be a Pokemon thing, just any sort of design project like this where we get to work together and make changes to something that we really enjoy and love.
I guess I learned that I really don't gel as much with the Pokemon design philosophy, and I think that's okay, especially now that I'm not making as many fake Pokemon as I used to, and it's not a huge part of my identity as it used to be. It's just like, maybe I don't like this design angle, or maybe I liked it at some point and I don't anymore. I still like Pokemon. I'm more of a Digimon fan nowadays, but I still Scarlet and Violet was fun. I still like a lot of the designs, it's a fun design framework to work within, but the types and the evolutions and all that. But maybe it's just not maybe I just need to branch out in my own direction, and that's what I've been doing lately with my own art. So I wouldn't say I like Pokemon any less because of the project.
Well, that's
just,
good.
That would be weird. That would be weird. As like I redesigned half of the original Pokemon. I'm like, no, I hate Pokemon. But I think I've come to the realization that maybe it's just I'll draw my sketch and I'll leave it to Libris to make it actually look like a Pokemon.
I think there's benefits to working within a given art style, a given creature design aesthetic. It gives you certain constraints that you can play within, and you can try to push the boundaries. But yeah, I can see Ness's points that it's also a little bit restrictive and doesn't necessarily. There are certain things you can't do with a Pokemon design. I certainly learned a lot about what works and doesn't work in Pokemon creature design, and it's certainly been an interesting experience, like working with, doing creature design as a collaborative effort, rather than just like, oh, here's my idea. It's very different, and I think in general, much stronger. I think that if we just have our own ideas and call it finished without sharing it, without showing it to anyone, we're missing out on opportunities to make it better. The important takeaway is that if you're trying to design Pokemon, then you should be designing Pokemon in the way that Pokemon are designed, which is to say, someone comes up with an idea, but ultimately it's a collaborative project of several different people having input, and maybe just one or a few people doing the final art with, and that helps them look more cohesive in the end. But like you can have a good idea, but for the final product to be good, it has to go through iterations, and the best way to do that is with other people. Obviously, you can do iterations on your own, and that's useful as well. But I think having other ideas come in is really important.
That is good advice right there for all the Fakemon creators.
So are we ready to wrap up?
Yeah, those are all the questions that I had for you guys. Unless you have any closing thoughts, yeah.
No, I think I'm good. Thank you for having me, though. This was fun to look back over our stuff. And
yeah, thanks.
give it a little extra critique.
Yeah, and thank you, Ben, for guest hosting. Do you guys want to plug anything? You want to share your social media handles, anything like that?
Not at the moment. I'm not super active on social media right now.
I post on Twitter and Blue Sky at banana_meteor. It might just be no underscore on Blue Sky. You'll find me if you search Banana Meteor. And I mostly don't do Pokemon stuff, but if you like N64 platformers, come hang out.
Yeah, I'm Tam Valley Productions. Tam Valley Productions on all platforms. I dabble in fake mon creation myself, and just kind of variety Pokemon content.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, you're watching this on my channel, so you can easily find me here on YouTube. But you can also find me on Mastodon or any federated service. I'm Libris at donfan.social. All right. Well, thank you again for joining me. And of course, a huge thank you to the Libros who support my work financially. If you want...
Libros.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Had you not picked up on that before?
I must have just put it out of my head, but God, that's clever. I love that.
Thank you to Ron, True Green 7, for that idea.
It's definitely one of my favorite channel member names.
Ron suggested that, and I was like, I kind of hate it, but it's too perfect.
I love it. No hate.
It's good. It's good.
I don't want to be a bro, you know? But well, if you want to become a Libro and become part of the core UmbreonLibris community, you can give me a tip on Ko-fi or become a YouTube channel member. Tin Tower Talks is produced from my home on the territory of the Lekwungen people, now known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. This episode was hosted by Ben of Tam Valley Productions and edited by me, Libris. The intro and outro music was composed by Northern District, and the UmbreonLibris logo was designed by Adept Jaren. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next chapter.